They grounded her model, handed her a desk, and called her dangerous. Then the fire she predicted arrived and took everything they had, not loudly. The IG representative did not need volume. He had the document, he had the contract number, he had Holt Carrigan's signature, dated and notarized, on a hydraulic sensor certification for Region 9 that approved equipment a field report had already flagged as failing under pressure load. The amount printed on the line below his name was $4,200,000. The beneficiary was the sensor manufacturer. The date was 14 months before a pilot named Marcus Dell flew an air tanker into a Sierra Nevada ridge and did not come back. The room held still. The projection screen at the head of the table hummed, a low mechanical sound, steady and indifferent. The institutional carpet absorbed footsteps and offered nothing back. There were no windows. There was nowhere to look except at each other, and most of the people in the room were looking at Carrigan. Carrigan, 63 years old, a man who had run Region 9 fire operations for 11 years on the strength of his administrative certainty, sat with both hands flat on the mahogany and did not speak. His attorney stood. "I'm going to object to the entry of that document on procedural grounds." The attorney's voice was sharp and practiced, the voice of someone who had done this before. Under Section 12, Subsection 4 of the Federal Administrative Procedures Act, any documentary evidence entered into an interagency debrief proceeding requires prior disclosure to all represented parties no less than 72 hours before the session. That disclosure did not occur. This document is inadmissible in this forum. The IG representative did not look up. He read the contract number a second time. Then he looked directly at Holt Carrigan and asked him to confirm his signature. Across the table, Nadia Voss did not move. She did not lean forward. She did not look at Carrigan's attorney. She was holding the rolled incident map in both hands, the same map she had unrolled in a windowless data room 6 weeks ago, the same map she had carried out of a burning southern corridor on radio battery and memorized terrain, and at the top of the map, written in her own handwriting in red marker, was a line she had not been able to get out of her head since the morning Carrigan said it to her. "Your model isn't a tool, Voss. It's a liability. You sit, you review, you sign off. That's the assignment." She had written it down so she would not mistake what she had heard. She had written it down because she knew even then that there would be a room like this one. She had not known when. She had not known what the room would look like, but she had known there would be a table and a document and a silence that Holt Carrigan would not know how to fill. His hands pressed flat against the mahogany. The knuckles were pale. The coffee mug, Region 9. Excellence Award, ceramic, a hairline crack along the base, sat to his right, untouched. He had not answered. The IG representative turned the page. "Before we show you how a woman locked in a supply closet with old paperwork, talked 3 crews off a burning mountain, and buried the man who tried to bury her, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from." 6 weeks earlier. The Data Review Room, Region 9, Annex Reno, Nevada. The room was not large. It had no window. The walls were stacked floor to ceiling with archived fire reports in manila folders, incident after incident, season after season, going back 22 years, and the smell in the room was old paper and dry ink, and the particular stillness of a building where decisions are made by people who do not go near fire. A single overhead bulb, a metal desk, a chair with a torn vinyl seat. Carrigan had closed the door 2 minutes ago. The outer office was quiet, the radio consoles out there, a wall of them, green indicators, handset brackets, the constant low-frequency hiss of channels held open, were silent at this hour. The building ran on morning shift schedules. Nadia had been given no schedule. She had been given the room. Nadia uncapped the map and spread it across the desk. She opened the first manila folder. The compliance indexing was real work. She would do it. She would index every report he had given her, date it, log it, and initial the cover sheet the way the assignment required. She would do this because it was the assignment and because she had been doing the real thing underneath assigned tasks since she was 26 years old and had learned that the institutions that try to erase you are rarely careful enough to remove the evidence first. Marcus Dell had written it. She set the page flat on the desk beside the incident map. She looked at it for a moment. Then she picked up her red pen and began to annotate. She did not call anyone. She did not argue. The fluorescent bulb above her hummed steadily, and the outer office stayed silent, and the weight of 22 years of archived fire seasons pressed in from every wall, and she worked. The model was not running yet, but it was running in her head, and what she needed, the suppressed wind shear data, the ridge elevation reversals, the documentation that should have been part of every operational brief for the past decade, was in this room. Carrigan had sent her here to neutralize her. He had handed her the exact instrument she needed and locked her in with it. She opened the next folder, then the next. Somewhere above the Sierra Nevada, 200 miles south-southeast of the Region 9 Annex, a bank of dry lightning was building over the ridgeline in the dark. Nadia did not know this yet. She turned to the next folder. She had no idea, bent over the desk with her red pen, that within 2 weeks the three objects she was about to isolate, the wind shear sheet, the missing sensor data, Callaway's field log, would be the only thing standing between 22 people and a ridgeline they were never meant to trust. 14 hours of unvalidated methodology. By the end of the second week, the red ink had taken over. She was not guessing. She had never been guessing. The methodology was built on 3 things: incident records spanning 2 decades, her own 11 years of field observation about how ridgeline fire moved through Chaparral and Manzanita when the afternoon heating pulled air up the drainage couloirs and the ridge pushed it back down, and something else, something she had been pulling out of the archived folders, folder by folder, folded in among the compliance summaries and budget attachments and all the paperwork that agencies produced to prove they were paying attention while they were not paying attention. Nadia was looking at it. She did not have a window. She had the data. She opened the next folder in the stack, an incident from 2 years prior, Chaparral Zone, Lower Sierra, and found what she was looking for on the third page in a wind shear data sheet, hand-notated. The handwriting was small and precise, the kind of handwriting that belongs to a person who has written in the field, in wind, in gloves, under time pressure. The margins were filled with secondary calculations. The initials in the lower right corner were MD. Nadia looked at it for 3 seconds. She did not pause long. She placed it in her projection stack between her red annotated pages and the base map and moved on to the next folder. She had seen that handwriting before. She had seen those initials before. She filed the recognition away the way she filed everything that was not immediately actionable in the back of her mind, where it would sit until she needed it. The next folder was different. It was labeled in the same administrative font as everything else in the room. Incident report, air tanker retardant operations, Sierra Nevada zone. Date from 2 years prior. Status, closed, pilot error. She opened it. The standard sections were all present: flight manifest, incident timeline, post-incident summary. The summary cited wind and visibility conditions. It cited pilot response. It cited the conclusion, pilot error, contributing factors, case closed. The sensor data was not in it. Every air tanker incident file she had reviewed in 11 years of fieldwork contained hydraulic pressure sensor logs. The sensors recorded pressure load performance during steep approach and retardant drop sequences. Those logs were standard. They were required by protocol. They were always in the file. This file did not have them. Nadia turned to each page carefully. She checked the attachments index on the inside cover. The sensor log line was there, listed, numbered, referenced, but the pages it pointed to were not present. The file had been organized to look complete. You would have to know what you were looking for to notice the gap. She set the folder aside without comment. She wrote nothing in the margin. She did not reach for her red pen. She pulled the next folder and kept working. The radio in the outer office woke up at 4:12. Nadia heard it through the wall. The burst of static, then a voice, then 2 more voices overlapping, then the particular frequency of a building shifting from sleep to emergency, footsteps in the hallway, a door opening and closing, the radio staying on. She stood up from the table and looked through the narrow interior window that separated the data room from the hallway. The overnight duty officer was at the radio console. His back was to her. His shoulders were tight. She looked at her projection on the table. She looked at the drainage orientation on her base map. She looked at the diurnal heating timeline she had penciled along the bottom margin. She sat back down. She was not authorized to be at that radio. She had been told clearly by a man with a Region 9 Excellence Award on his coffee mug that her role was to review, index, and sign off. She reviewed, she indexed, she did not go to the radio. By 05:30, the smoke column was visible to anyone standing at the southern windows of the Region 9 Fire Operations Office. By 0600, the duty officer had confirmed a dry lightning ignition, Chaparral and Manzanita on the flanks, a drainage couloir running north to south, the smoke building fast in the pre-dawn heat. The fire had 400 acres by first light. That number would not hold. Nadia knew it would not hold. Her model said so with a clarity that did not require interpretation. The drainage orientation funneled air up from the south in the afternoon heating cycle. The ridge reversed it. At elevation, when the 2 forces met, the wind shear event would be sudden, and it would drive fire laterally across the eastern flank at a rate that hand crews on the line would not be able to outrun on foot. She ran the numbers again. Pre-dawn of Fire Day 1. Her pencil moved across the timeline in short, deliberate strokes. 14 hours. That was the window. She wrote the number at the top of the projection page and circled it in red. The deployment notice came under her door at 06:45. She picked it up from the floor. It was a single sheet, the standard emergency activation roster, the briefing time, the field command structure. She read it the way she read everything, straight through, once, without expression. Her name was not on it. She read the field incident commander line, Reed Calloway. She had worked 2 suppression seasons in the same region as Calloway, different crews, different corridors, but the same general theater. He was thorough. He was formal in a way that some people mistook for coldness. He took notes. She had never worked directly under him, but she had seen him at the after-action reviews, the spiral-bound field log always in his hand, always open, always being written in. She set the deployment notice on the corner of her table. Then she took out a single sheet of paper and began to write. The repositioning request took her 22 minutes to draft. It was 1 page. It cited 6 data sources by date and incident number, 4 from her archived review, 2 from her own field records attached as an appendix. It named 3 crews, Crew 7, 22 personnel, Crew 12, Crew 19. It described their committed positions in the southern suppression corridor. It described in plain language what her model showed would happen to those positions in the next 14 hours if the wind shear reversal materialized as projected. She did not use the word model. She described what the data showed. She let the data speak in the plainest language she knew. She submitted it to Carrigan's office through the duty officer at 06:30. She watched the duty officer take it down the hallway. She went back to the data review room and kept working. At 08:11, an envelope came back. The duty officer slid it through the gap at the bottom of the door. Nadia picked it up. She unfolded the single sheet inside. Request denied. Methodology unvalidated. Southern corridor commitment to be maintained per operational plan. Nadia read it twice. She turned it over. The back was blank. She set it on the desk next to her rolled incident map. The 2 documents sat there together, her decade of field observation in 3 colors on laminated paper, and Carrigan's 9-word institutional verdict on what it was worth. Her jaw tightened. Her breathing steadied. She did not call anyone. She did not walk down the hall to Carrigan's office. She did not reach for the phone on the corner of the table. She opened the next archived folder and kept annotating. Nadia was not in the room. She did not hear the conversation, but Calloway was in the room. And Calloway had his field log open as he always did when Carrigan spoke. And Calloway wrote down what Carrigan said in his own hand, in the particular shorthand he had developed over a decade of field work, shorthand that anyone with the right training could read back verbatim. The notation read, Carrigan, 0830. Verbal, do not forward any advisory from the data review room to field crews. Non-operational source. If Voss contacts the line, route it through me first. Calloway wrote it down. He said nothing. He closed the log. He clipped it back to his vest. He had been clipping that log to his vest for 9 years. It was worn at the spine, the coil bent flat on one side from pressure. The cover was faded green canvas, the kind that holds up in rain and smoke. It was the 3rd log of its kind he had used since he first went to the field, and he had kept the previous 2 in a filing cabinet in his office, in chronological order, dated on the spine. He had never been asked to produce one in a formal proceeding. He had also never stopped expecting the day when he might be. Nadia set the pilot error folder, the one without the sensor data, at the front of a separate pile. She did not label the pile. She did not need to. She was the only person in the room. The MD datasheet from 2 years back was in her projection stack. The pilot error folder with the missing sensors was in the separate pile. Those 2 things were not yet connected in any document she had written. They were connected in her head, in the pattern she had been reading for 2 weeks, and in the way the initials at the bottom of the hand-notated datasheet matched the pilot name in the closed file. She did not write that connection down yet. She was not ready to write it down yet. When she wrote something down, it became a record. When it became a record, it could be taken from her, or discarded, or denied. She needed more before she made it a record. By mid-morning, the fire had 14,000 acres. The number came through the outer office radio, read by a dispatcher in a voice trained to stay flat. Nadia heard it through the wall. She stopped writing. She looked at the number she had circled in red at the top of her projection page. 14 hours. The fire had gone from 400 acres to 14,000 acres in a single night. That was not a normal suppression scenario. That was a fire that had found its corridor and was already moving the way the drainage wanted it to move. She picked up her pencil and revised the timeline. The numbers shifted. The wind shear window narrowed. The flank collapse was no longer 14 hours away. It was 11. She set the pencil down. She looked at what the model said. She looked at the deployment roster on the corner of her table, with its crew positions and its corridor commitments and its field incident commander who had been told not to forward anything she said. She looked at the radio on the outer office wall through the data room window. The radio was quiet now. The dispatcher had moved to a different frequency. The building was in operational mode. Every person authorized to do something was doing it, in the right room, with the right clearance, following the right protocol. Somewhere in the forwarded deployment documents she had received that morning, the standard situation packet the duty officer sent to all personnel, including those assigned to data review, there was a roster page from the NIFC field coordination trailer at the incident base camp. She had read it when it arrived and set it aside. She pulled it out now and found the line she remembered: Regional Liaison, NIFC Observer. The name next to it was Priya Okafor. Nadia did not know Priya Okafor. She recognized the NIFC designation, the National Interagency Fire Center, which sat outside Region 9's chain of command. An NIFC liaison operated under a different authority structure than anything Kerrigan could issue a written denial to. She folded the situation packet and placed it on top of the denial letter, on top of the rolled map, on top of everything she had built in 2 weeks in a windowless room with one overhead bulb and 22 years of archived fire reports. She looked at the radio through the window. 11 hours. The model did not negotiate. It did not care who had signed what. It described what physics would do to 3 crews on a ridge when the wind shear reversal came, and the physics had no interest in Kerrigan's operational plan. Nadia picked up her red pen. She ran the projection a second time, checking every number, every drainage measurement, every timing assumption. The result came out the same as the first time. It always came out the same. She circled the new number at the top of the page. 11 hours. The radio on the outer office wall came back to life, a burst of field traffic, a line boss reporting position, and then quiet again, and the 22 personnel of Crew 7 were still in the corridor. She wrote Priya Okafor's name on the top corner of the projection page, not as a plan, not yet, as a fact to hold. She looked at Marcus Dell's wind shear sheet, the handwriting still precise after 11 years in the dark. He had run his own projections. He had circled his own numbers. He had not known about the sensor contract when he flew that tanker into the ridge, and the contract had not known about him until afterward, until his death became useful. She placed the projection on top of Dell's sheet. Same corridor, same drainage geometry, same ridge elevation wind shear signature, different fire, same physics. 11 hours, and the model was ready. Within hours, that projection with Priya's name would travel through an open channel as a federal timestamp, and Kerrigan would learn too late that some transmissions cannot be unheard. The radio traffic started around noon. Nadia sat at the supply closet desk and did not look at the door. Quick pause. If you've made it this far, comment the word watermelon below. Then we continue the story. The eastern flank of the southern suppression corridor was going to collapse. It was not a warning. It was a schedule. She had 11 hours from the time she first recalculated. That had been this morning. She did not recalculate again. The number was the number. She pulled the interagency reference document from the bottom of the stack beside her desk, a standard coordination protocol binder, the kind every region kept in every field office and every annex, publicly available, not restricted. She found the NIFC field coordination trailer contact number on page 41 under interagency data relay procedures. She wrote the number on the corner of her projection page in black pen, then crossed it out and wrote it again on a separate sheet so it was clean. She picked up the phone. The line connected on the second ring. A duty coordinator at the NIFC field coordination trailer answered, and Nadia identified herself by name and region without preamble. Nadia Voss, Region 9. I have a projection model I need to relay through NIFC's data protocol. 6 sources. I'm going to read you the routing code and the file header. A pause on the line. Not hostile, not warm. The pause of someone picking up a pen. Go ahead, the duty coordinator said. She went ahead. Federal timestamp, 12:03 hours. She set the phone down. What she had also done, and this was not incidental, was create a federal record that could not be recalled. The timestamp was logged on NIFC's system. The six-source model was attached to that timestamp. The incident reference number connected it to the fire. None of that could be unmade. Kerrigan did not know she had done this. He would not know until after the fire. She set the rolled map on the desk beside the phone and waited. 40 minutes later, her phone rang. She picked up on the first ring. "Boss," she said. Nadia said nothing. She waited. "I want to confirm two things with you," Priya said. "First, you're describing a wind shear reversal at ridge elevation driving collapse of the eastern flank. You're saying this will occur inside an 11-hour window from this morning's fire growth reading." "That was this morning," Nadia said. "Based on current growth rate and the diurnal heating curve, the window is closer to 8 hours from now." A short silence. 8 hours. Another silence. Longer. "Second thing," Priya said, "NIFC's assessment is consistent with your projection. Our meteorology desk flagged the ridge elevation instability this morning. They didn't have the drainage orientation analysis. Your model completes the picture." Nadia sat still. "Understood," Nadia said. "Voss." A pause. "The three crews in the southern corridor. Do you have their last known positions?" "From the sector assignments I've been able to hear through the door," Nadia said. "Crew 7 is in the corridor. Crew 12 is on the drainage side. Crew 19 is on the ridge approach." "That matches our coordination log," Priya said. "Use the channel." The line went quiet. Priya was gone. "Before we show you what she said into that radio and what it cost to say it, make sure you're subscribed, because what happens in the next 11 minutes changes every name in this story." She picked up the handset for the NIFC Interagency Coordination channel and keyed the transmit button. She did not announce herself with rank. She said her name and the channel authorization code Priya had given her, and then she began to talk. She said all of it without raising her voice. On the command net, the one she could not access, the one running through Kerrigan's communications console in the fire operations office, Reed Calloway was doing something else entirely. Now, at 13:47, he keyed the command net. "Crew 7 line boss, this is Calloway." His voice was flat, formal, the voice of someone reading a bureaucratic directive from a sheet. "Advisory from non-operational source. Do not action. Corridor commitment holds." Crew 7's line boss acknowledged. The line went quiet. Calloway's pen was already moving in his field log before the acknowledgement finished. He wrote the time, 13:47, and the exact content of the message he had just transmitted. He wrote, "Per Kerrigan written order, 0830, confirmed 13:47. He wrote the call sign. He wrote the channel. He did not pause between the transmission and the notation. His pen moved the way it always moved, without hesitation, without editorial comment, with the precision of someone who understood that the log was not a diary, it was a record. It existed for the proceeding that would come after, not the moment he was standing in. He clipped the log back to his vest. The field log wrote against his ribs as he walked back to the coordination trailer. At 14:04, the eastern flank moved 800 meters in 11 minutes. Crew 7, 22 personnel, was in the corridor. Nadia was already transmitting. "Crew 7, your fuel break is bearing 078 from your last sector marker. Distance is approximately 400 meters. The smoke is moving east-southeast, which means it will cross the corridor in approximately 9 minutes from now. You have 9 minutes to reach the break. Move now." A pause on the channel. Crew 7's line boss came back. His voice was controlled, but there was something in it. Not panic, not quite disbelief, but the particular quality of a voice calibrated against a reality that is arriving faster than expected. "Who is this?" "Nadia Voss, NIFC, Hazard Advisory, Coordination Channel, authorization logged at 1203. The fuel break at 078 is 400 meters. You have 9 minutes. The break has been used as emergency egress twice in this corridor, 1987 and 2009. It holds." The pause was 3 seconds long. Nadia counted them. Then Crew 7's line boss said, "Copy, moving." She did not track them through the traverse by counting seconds. She tracked them by listening to the channel, to the line boss's periodic position calls, to the background sound of boots on dry chaparral and the shift in radio acoustics that meant the crew was moving through increasingly dense smoke. At one point, the channel dropped for 40 seconds. She waited. The channel came back. Position call, 200 meters to the break. She kept transmitting. On a separate NIFC coordination directive that Priya had already authorized and issued before the collapse began, because Priya had read the model, both pages, all 6 sources, Crew 12 repositioned off the drainage. They moved to the uphill anchor point Nadia's model had identified as the secondary safe zone. They were clear of the drainage before the fire reached it. Crew 19 was on the ridge approach when the fire came up below them. They had 2 minutes. They used the 2 minutes. They cleared a section of ground and deployed 2 fire shelters, the reflective shells that a crew carries as a last resort, that are not comfortable and are not a guarantee, but that, when deployed correctly on cleared ground with the right wind orientation, hold. The 2 shelters held. The crew sheltered in place as the fire moved through the ridge approach below the position they had cleared. Crew 19 emerged from their shelters intact. No fatalities. She said it back to herself, sitting at the desk in the data review room with the map open in front of her, not as a relief, but as a fact. All 3 crews. No fatalities. Crew 19's 2 shelters were burned to their frames. Crew 7's 22 personnel were through the fuel break and in the clear. Crew 12 was on the anchor point above the drainage. No fatalities. The fluorescent bulb above her desk hummed at its single frequency. She did not move for a moment. Her hands were flat on the map. The red annotations she had made over 2 weeks were still legible under her palms. The drainage lines, the diurnal heating curve, the wind shear reversal window marked in red at the exact time the reversal had actually occurred. The data had said 1400 to 1415. The collapse had begun at 1404. She rolled the map up slowly. She set the rubber band around it. She set it beside the phone. That word, acknowledged, was the last thing Crew 7's line boss heard in her voice before the smoke took the radio. She sat with that for a moment. She did not need it to mean more than it meant. It meant 22 people were on the right side of the fuel break. She did not need to document it herself. The system had documented it. She sat in the data review room. The outer office radio traffic was changing register. Not the escalating churn of active emergency operations, but something else, something more deliberate. She could hear Priya Okafor's voice through the wall now, not clearly, just the cadence of it, measured, reading something aloud, the particular rhythm of an official log being entered into a record, starting with the transmission at 12:03, the 6-source hazard projection, the field liaison verbal authorization, the repositioning guidance, the crew movement confirmations. In the Region 9 Fire Operations Office, on the other side of 2 walls and a hallway, a radio crackled. Holt Carrigan heard it. He was holding his Region 9 Excellence Award mug. The coffee in it had gone cold an hour ago. He set it down on the console, very carefully, the way a person sets something down when their hands need to be still and they are making sure they are still. Nadia sat in the data room and listened to the fluorescent bulb hum. She did not hear what happened on the other side of the wall. She did not need to. She had done what the 11-hour window required. The timestamp was logged. The crews were through. The 6 data sources cited in Nadia's projection included 3 archived incident reports with Dell's hand-notated wind shear methodology embedded in their suppressed annexes. The NIFC review process had already flagged the discrepancy between the pilot error ruling on Dell's crash and the missing sensor report. Now the 6-source model, timestamped and filed as a federal record, would give Priya Okafor the thread she needed to connect the suppressed methodology in those annex reports to the entity that had suppressed it. None of that had happened yet. It would happen in the days after the fire in the post-incident review, when Priya sat down with the full file chain and began tracing the gaps. The radio crackled again. Priya Okafor continued reading. Harrigan's phone rang, and that was how she ended up in that conference room. But we are not there yet. She was 40 minutes into the stack when she found it. Priya set the document down on the table in front of her. She opened her laptop. She navigated to the NIFC Regional Incident Commander database, entered the initials and the Region 9 geographic filter, and waited. The match returned in 4 seconds. Priya looked at the page for a long moment. Then she moved it to a separate column. She did not say anything. There was no one in the trailer to say anything to. She picked up her pen and made a single notation in her log. Then she continued reading. That same morning, a formal written communication arrived at the NIFC Review Coordinator's office in Reno from Region 9 Legal Counsel. The narrator does not editorialize about what it meant. The language spoke for itself. Holt Carrigan's name was not on the communication. His legal counsel's firm name was. His contempt was present in every sentence, but it was not personal. That was the important thing. Carrigan was not angry. He was managing a process. He was reclassifying what Nadia had done in terms that would survive a procedural review, layering administrative language over the fact that 3 crews were alive because she had acted. Anger makes mistakes. Process does not, unless someone finds the right thread to pull. Priya made another notation in her log. Then she picked up her phone and called the NIFC records office. "I need the Marcus Dell crash investigation file," she said. "Full file, not the summary, everything." The records officer told her it was in the federal system and she could have it within the hour. "Thank you," Priya said. She set the phone down and continued reading. The file arrived as a PDF transferred to her secure terminal. Priya opened it and began reading. The file was thin. For a crash investigation involving a federal air tanker, a fatality, and a Sierra Nevada incident with documented complexity, it was remarkably thin. 41 pages where a crash investigation of this type would normally generate 120. She made a longer notation in her log, several lines. She did not rush it. Then she called up the NIFC request file for Kerrigan's internal memos, which had been obtained through the standard review process and were sitting in the federal file chain. She began cross-referencing. She found it on page 7 of the contract attachment log. The sensor model number in the maintenance record matched the certified series in the contract exactly. Priya did not move for a moment. Her hand was resting flat on the table next to the keyboard. The diesel generator outside the trailer made a steady low sound. The overhead fluorescent strip hummed. She sat very still and then she picked up her phone. The call came through to Nadia's desk in the data review room where she was still assigned, where no one had formally changed her assignment, where she had been sitting for the past hour with a cup of black coffee gone cold beside the keyboard and the rolled incident map propped against the wall. Nadia answered on the second ring. "Voss, this is Priya Okafor." Priya's voice was measured. The listening silence behind it was already present, ready. "I'm reviewing your transmission package." "I know," Nadia said. "I have a question." A pause, not hesitation, preparation. "Did Marcus Dell build the analytical framework your model is based on?" Nadia did not look at anything in particular. The overhead bulb above her head cast the same flat light it always had. The stacked manila folders along the wall had not moved. The cold coffee was on her left, exactly where she had set it. "Yes," she said. Priya's listening silence was longer this time. It lasted perhaps 5 seconds, which is a long time in a phone call. Then she said, "I need you to send me everything you have with his initials on it." "All right, everything. Original documents. Scans if the originals can't travel. I need them in the NIFC file before the end of the day." "You'll have them," Nadia said. Priya did not say thank you. She ended the call. Nadia set the phone down. She pulled the folder from the bottom of her working stack, the one she had set aside in week 1, the one she had kept separate from the rest because she understood what it was the moment she recognized the handwriting. She opened it on the desk in front of her. Dell could not speak. His data could. His data was about to enter the federal file chain with a timestamp that would make it permanent. Nadia scanned every page individually. She attached them to the secure file transfer and sent them to Priya's NIFC terminal. Then she sat back in her chair and looked at the empty folder. The overhead bulb hummed. The air in the data review room was still dry and cool and smelled of old paper and ink. Nothing about the room had changed. She had been in it for weeks. She had come in with a rolled map and left it propped against the wall every morning and found it there every evening. And the room had given her everything she needed without Kerrigan ever understanding what he had put in it alongside her. He had not spoken to Kerrigan since the formal debrief was announced. He had not approached Nadia. He had not contacted NIFC independently. He was waiting. He had been waiting since the morning he wrote the first override instruction in his log in his own shorthand with the timestamp and Kerrigan's name and the word verbatim at the top of the entry to indicate that what followed was a direct reproduction of the spoken instruction he had received. He had known then what the log was for. He had known the formal proceeding would come. All he had to do was keep the log intact and show up. Calloway was good at waiting. He was less good at knowing what he had set in motion, but that was not his problem to manage. His problem was the log, and the log was clipped to his vest, and it was going nowhere. By the end of the investigation week, Priya Okafor's table in the NIFC field coordination trailer held the following. The debrief had been convened. The federal conference room in Reno had been booked. Fire operations chiefs, NIFC leadership, and a Forest Service Inspector General had been notified. The date was set. The evidence was complete. The package was in the federal file. It was time-stamped, sourced, cross-referenced, and sitting in a chain that Kerrigan's legal counsel could not reach. For approximately 4 hours, it felt like it might be enough. The duty officer knocked on the data room door at 4:17 in the afternoon. Nadia heard the knock and said, "Come in." The duty officer entered, set an envelope on the edge of the desk nearest the door, and left without speaking. Administrative delivery. Nothing unusual about the action. Nadia picked up the envelope. The return address was Region 9 Fire Operations, Administrative Division. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper printed on Region 9 letterhead. with the header bold across the top, Notice of Formal Conduct Review. The hearing date was printed at the bottom of the page in the same clean administrative font as everything else. It was 2 days before the interagency debrief. Nadia read the notice once. She set it on the desk next to the rolled map. The overhead bulb hummed. The manila folders along the walls held 22 years of archived fire reports in the same flat silence they always had. She understood what the hearing date meant. If the conduct review produced a finding against her before the debrief convened, the Region 9 chain of command could move to suspend her incident commander certification. A suspended certification would allow Kerrigan's legal counsel to argue in the federal conference room that the person presenting the model was not a currently certified incident commander and therefore had no standing to present operational methodology to the Inspector General. It was not a guaranteed move. It was a process move, the kind of move that does not require anger, the kind of move that requires only a correctly filed form and a hearing scheduled before the other proceeding. Nadia sat with this for a moment. The cold coffee was still on her left. She had not touched it. Then she opened her laptop. She navigated to the IG office contact page for the NIFC review process. She opened a new message and began drafting a request for formal status as a cooperating witness in the ongoing NIFC review, with a notation that she was in possession of original source materials relevant to the investigation and that a concurrent Region 9 conduct review had been initiated against her, with a hearing date that preceded the interagency debrief by 48 hours. She typed it in plain, direct sentences, no decoration, no argument, just the facts in the order they had occurred and what she was requesting and why. She read it once, then she hit send, and the message went into the federal system with a timestamp, and the timestamp made it permanent, and she closed the laptop and looked at the rolled map leaning against the wall beside the desk. The hearing was 22 hours away, and Nadia would unroll that map one more time in the quiet of the data room, knowing by then that Kerrigan's legal team had already seen what she'd sent, and that nothing she found on the laminate could stop what was coming. Quick pause. If you've made it this far, comment the word sunflower below, then we continue the story. The fire was contained. The radio in the outer office had been quiet for 6 hours. Nadia Voss was 44 years old, and this was the first evening in 11 days that she had nothing left to calculate. She unrolled the laminated incident map on the desk and laid it flat, not to work, not to check anything, just to look at it. 22 personnel in Crew 7. She did not count them again. She knew the number. She had known the number since she wrote it on the repositioning request. She had known it on the radio when Crew 7's line boss came back through static and said they were through. She had known it in the specific way you know something that you were not certain you would get to keep knowing. She looked at the map and let herself know it again. There was a notation near the ridgeline that she had not drawn herself, a wind shear directional arrow running northeast along the upper elevation band, sketched in a slightly lighter pencil weight than everything else on the page. The line was older than her annotations. The hand was different. She had inherited it with the files, folded into a report she had pulled from the data room's bottom shelf in the first week of her assignment. Marcus Dell had drawn it. She had never corrected it or redrawn it. It had been accurate. She stood there and looked at his arrow and her arcs and the small checks that meant everyone was still alive. The overhead bulb hummed. Outside, through the wall, Reno was being quiet in the way cities are quiet late on a weeknight. Not silent, just distant, the sound of traffic 4 blocks over and a door somewhere closing. Her secure work terminal held 2 new messages. She had read them both. The first was from Priya Okafor, sent from the NIFC field coordination trailer at 6:14 in the evening. It was 2 sentences. File is complete. See you in Reno. Nadia had read Priya's message, and for approximately 1 minute she had let herself believe the sequence was settled. The second message had arrived at 9:47 p.m. from the Region 9 duty officer. She had read it twice, not because it was unclear, but because the implications required a second pass to fully absorb. The conduct review hearing had been moved. It was now scheduled for tomorrow morning. The original notice had placed it 48 hours before the debrief. The rescheduled time placed it 1 full day earlier, which put it 1 full day before the debrief instead of 2, but that was not the problem. The problem was that the debrief was still 2 days out, the certification still active, and the conduct review was now happening before she could walk into that federal conference room. The notice cited administrative scheduling. She read those 2 words a third time. Administrative scheduling. Her jaw tightened. Her breathing steadied. She thought about the cooperating witness request she had filed at 4:22 p.m. 6 days ago, which the IG office had acknowledged but not yet acted on. She She did not know whether the acknowledgement was enough. She did not pick up the phone. It was late. The annex was empty. There was no one to call tonight who could change the hearing time, and calling Priya now would be noise without result. The IG office was not reachable at this hour. Calloway had not reached out to her directly, and she would not reach out to him. Whatever was in that field log was his to place on the table when the time came, not hers to ask for. She reached out and picked up the rolled map. Her left hand closed around it, the same grip she had used every day for 3 weeks in the data room, the same grip she had used in the field coordination trailer when she transmitted the projection package to Priya, the same grip she had maintained through the radio transmission when the eastern flank collapsed and the fire drove 800 meters in 11 minutes, and Crew 7's line boss needed to know exactly which direction to move 22 people on a burning mountain. It was a reflex by now, not a decision. She walked to the door. She reached back and turned off the overhead bulb. The data room went dark behind her. The manila folders, the stacked decades of archived reports, Marcus Dell's handwriting folded into their spines, Kerrigan's inadvertent archive of everything he had tried to erase, all of it went dark. The map was still under her arm when she stepped into the hallway and the door swung shut behind her. The folding chairs were already arranged in the smaller room 4 corridors away, waiting for her name to be called before a panel that Kerrigan would sit across from, not above. The hearing room was on the 2nd floor of the Reno Operations Building, down a corridor that smelled of carpet adhesive and recycled air, 3 folding chairs on one side of a conference table, a panel of 3 Region 9 supervisors on the other, no windows, a wall clock with a second hand that moved in distinct, audible steps. Nadia Voss sat down, set the rolled incident map on the floor beside her chair, and looked at the panel. She had been in rooms like this before, different building, same table, same institutional carpet in that specific shade of gray that is chosen because it shows nothing. The panel chair was a supervisor named Garrett out of the Sacramento Coordination Office. He had a manila folder open in front of him and reading glasses that he kept pushing up his nose. He did not look at her when he began. "I have," Nadia said. Garrett nodded and reached for a second document in the folder. "Before the panel proceeds to testimony," he said, "I'm required to read into the record a written statement submitted by Region 9 Administrative Council on behalf of the acting regional director." The room was quiet. One of the other panel members, a woman from the Bishop Field office whose name tag read Horton, set her pen down on the table. Garrett cleared his throat. Garrett set the paper down. 18 months. The number sat in the room. Nadia had known it was coming. Priya's message 2 evenings ago had included it. The duty officer's rescheduling notice had implied it. But there is a difference between knowing a number and hearing it read aloud by someone with a folder and a clock ticking behind him. She did not move. Garrett looked at her. "Ms. Voss, the panel invites your response." "I'll respond to the charges," she said, "not to the characterization." Garrett nodded. "Proceed." The third panel member, a man from the Fresno Coordination Office whose name Nadia did not know, wrote something down. "I want the panel to note for the record," Nadia said, "that I am currently a cooperating witness in an active Inspector General review of this incident. That status was filed and timestamped in the federal system prior to the scheduling of this hearing." Garrett stopped writing. He looked at Horton. Horton looked at the man from Fresno. The man from Fresno looked at his notepad. No one on that panel had been told. "Can you provide the filing reference?" Garrett said. Nadia gave him the federal case intake number. She had memorized it 2 days ago when the acknowledgement came back from the IG office. Garrett wrote it down. His handwriting was slow and deliberate. He set the pen on the table. "The panel will take a recess," he said. 15 minutes. He stood. The other 2 stood. They filed out through a door at the back of the room. Nadia did not look at her phone. She did not look at the door. She looked at the wall clock and watched the second hand move through its discrete, even steps. The sound it made was small and regular and completely indifferent to everything in the room. She thought about Crew 7's line boss. She had never met him. She had talked him through a fuel break traverse in real time, using terrain data she had pulled from reports Kerrigan had given her as busy work, while smoke closed over the ridge above him. She did not know his name. 22 people, all of them alive. The clock moved. 14 minutes into the recess, the back door opened and Garrett came back in alone. He sat down. He pulled the reading glasses off and set them on the folder. "The panel has contacted NIFC to verify cooperating witness status," he said. "We spoke with the NIFC regional liaison." The room was quiet. Priya had said that without being asked. She had offered it as a factual statement, the way she did everything, without urgency, without drama, in the register of someone reading from a document that already exists. Garrett put the notepad down. Horton and the man from Fresno came back in through the rear door and took their seats. Garrett looked at the folder, then at Nadia. "You're free to go," he said. She walked out. The corridor was longer than she remembered. The carpet was the same shade of gray. The overhead lights ran in a continuous strip the length of the hallway, and somewhere at the far end a door was open to outside air. Reed Calloway was standing 6 feet from the hearing room door. He was in formal attire, a dark jacket, pressed shirt, collar closed. His worn, spiral-bound field log was clipped to his vest. He looked at her the way a person looks at someone they have been waiting for and did not want to acknowledge they were waiting for. He did not say anything about the hearing. He did not ask. "The log goes on the table tomorrow," he said. She looked at him. His jaw was set. He had the posture of a man who had made a decision some time ago and had simply been waiting for the right room to put it in. The field log was not new. It had weeks of ink in it. Every Carrigan instruction, written down in Calloway's own shorthand, time-stamped in real time, in the field, before anyone knew there would be a federal debrief. He had done that himself, without anyone asking him to, without anyone knowing. Calloway said nothing else. He walked down the corridor toward the far door and the outside air, and Nadia did not watch him go. She stood in the corridor for a moment with the rolled map under her arm. 22 people survived the flank collapse. 3 crews. Crew 19 had deployed 2 shelters. All of them were home. The institutional machinery was still moving to make that survival inadmissible. Her car was in the second row. She crossed the lot, opened the passenger door, and set the rolled map on the seat. She stood beside the car for a moment and looked at it. Calloway's log would be on the table beside it. She got in the car. She closed the door. She started the engine. Tomorrow was Reno. Tomorrow the rolled map would be unrolled in front of fire operations chiefs and the Forest Service Inspector General, and Holt Carrigan would finally hear what he'd spent 2 years trying to silence. The next morning, she walked into the federal conference room for the second time in her life. The projection screen at the far end of the room hummed to life and then held still, blank, waiting. The debrief chair spoke first. Nadia did not nod. She did not look around the table. She kept her hands flat on the rolled map in front of her. Priya Okafor looked at her once, briefly, and then looked back at the debrief chair. Before the chair could continue, Calloway moved. He unclipped the worn, spiral-bound field log from his vest. He set it on the mahogany table. The sound it made was small, a flat slap against the wood, but the room reacted to it the way rooms react to a sound in the middle of a silence that was almost comfortable. 2 of the fire operations chiefs looked at it. The IG representative did not look at it yet. The debrief chair said, "Mr. Calloway, can you identify the document you've placed on the record table?" "A contemporaneous operational log," Calloway said. "Every instruction I received during the Sierra Nevada Type 1 incident, every action I took, recorded in real time, in the field, on the day of the incident." "In real time," the debrief chair repeated. "Yes." The IG representative looked up from her bound file. She looked at the spiral-bound log. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "does this log contain instructions received from Holt Carrigan?" "Yes," Calloway said. Carrigan's attorney was already rising. He had the voice of a man accustomed to the sound of his own volume filling a room. The IG representative turned a page in the log. She did not look at the attorney. She did not look at Carrigan. "Overruled," she said. "The log is entered." The attorney stopped speaking. He sat down. The room absorbed the silence that followed. The particular silence of a room where an objection has been made at full volume and dismissed at half a breath, and everyone present has understood what that means about the relative weights of what is in the room. 3 of the fire operations chiefs did not look at each other. They did not need to. Priya Okafor did not move. The debrief chair pulled the log toward him and opened it to a flagged page. He read aloud, his voice measured and without inflection. He looked up at Calloway. "Is that entry an accurate record of the instruction you received and the action you took?" The instruction to label the advisory as originating from a non-operational source, that instruction came from Holt Carrigan. "In writing at 0830, Calloway said. "Confirmed verbally at 1347. The room did not make a sound. Nadia looked at the far wall. She did not look at Carrigan. But she was aware, in the way that people are aware of something in their peripheral vision that they choose not to turn toward, that his hands had not moved from the table. The debrief chair said, "Ms. Voss." Nadia unrolled the laminated incident map. She weighted the corners with the flat of her hands and let the room see it. 3 colors of annotation, a decade of field observation, the red lines of the projection running south through the drainage corridors toward the ridge. She started at the beginning. A fire operations chief from the neighboring region leaned forward slightly. His elbows came down on the table. She stopped. She looked at the map, not the room. The fire moved 800 meters in 11 minutes, she said, exactly as the model projected. The room was completely silent. The IG representative was writing. The fire operations chief from the neighboring region had not moved since leaning forward. Priya was still. Calloway was looking at the table. Nadia rolled the map. She did not re-announce what the room had just heard. She did not explain what the silence meant. Priya Okafor spoke next. She laid 3 printed documents on the table and positioned them in a line. The MD Windshear data sheet, hand-notated, pencil original overwritten in blue, third-pass annotations in red, beside a copy of the crash investigation file flagged at page 28, beside the printed equipment certification contract. No one at the table spoke. "Mr. Carrigan," she said, "is that your signature on page 4 of this contract?" Carrigan did not answer. His attorney opened his mouth. The IG representative said without raising her voice, "Counsel, your client has been asked a direct question in a federal proceeding." Carrigan's hands pressed flat against the table. His jaw was set. His eyes were on the table surface 6 inches in front of him, not on the contract, not on the IG representative, not on anyone else in the room. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Carrigan's attorney said, "My client declines to answer at this time on the advice of counsel." The operations chief from the northern region looked at his notepad. The IG representative set the contract back on the table and wrote something in her bound file. Then she announced, into the act of recording, each item delivered in the same flat administrative cadence, without pause for reaction. The debrief chair wrote on his legal pad. Carrigan's attorney's pen moved quickly across the leather folder. 3. The pilot error classification on Marcus Dell's air tanker crash is formally reopened for independent review to be conducted outside Region 9 jurisdiction. Nobody at the table moved. She closed the file. This was what institutional collapse looked like, not a confrontation, not a raised voice, not a moment anyone could point to as a single dramatic event. It was the moment when every person in the room adjusted their posture at the same time, and none of them looked at the man who had been the authority in the room, and the authority left the room without him standing up, without anyone asking it to leave. The debrief chair said, "This session is adjourned." People began to stand. Papers gathered. The projection screen stopped humming. Carrigan's attorney leaned close and spoke quietly into his ear, and Carrigan sat very still while the words arrived, his hands flat on the table, the leather folder in front of him unopened. The fire operations chief from the neighboring region stood, picked up his notepad, and walked to the door without looking toward Carrigan's end of the table. The Region 9 chief stood and did the same. They did not say anything to each other in the room. They did not say anything to Nadia. They walked out with the particular purposefulness of men who have understood something that they will need time to fully reckon with. Priya gathered the 3 documents from the table and slid them into a federal file sleeve. She looked at Nadia once, a look that held the completion of something that had begun in a field coordination trailer with a transmission log and a hand-notated data sheet with initials she recognized, and then she walked out. Calloway picked up his spiral-bound field log from the table and clipped it back to his vest. He walked to the door and threw it without looking back. The room emptied, not quickly. With the particular heaviness of a room where something final has settled into the floor and the walls and will not be moved. Nadia stood at the table. The map was rolled in her left hand. The room around her was quiet. Fluorescent lights, institutional carpet, the faint smell of dry air and mahogany. The door was open. She did not speak. She did not look toward the end of the table where Carrigan sat with his attorney and his leather folder and his silence. She picked up nothing that had not belonged to her when she walked in. She walked out carrying the same rolled map she had carried in, the same decade of annotations, the same 6 data sources, the same red lines tracking a fire through terrain that had behaved exactly as they said it would. The map had not changed. It had never needed to change. The world had simply been made, at last, to look at it. The door to the federal conference room closed behind her. The hallway outside the federal conference room was empty. Not the emptiness of a room mid-session, waiting for people to return, the permanent kind, the kind that follows a reckoning that has no scheduled follow-up. Nadia walked the length of it without slowing. At the end of the corridor, through the glass door, Nevada daylight pressed flat and white against the building's face. She pushed through it. The parking lot held the same cars it had held that morning. Nothing had moved. The world outside the federal conference room had no idea what the world inside it had just become. She walked to her car. She set the rolled map on the passenger seat. the same way she had set it there the day before and the day before that, and the morning she had first carried it out of the data review room with the door closing behind her into darkness. The map did not know it had just been entered into a federal record. It did not need to know. Quick pause. If you've made it this far, comment the word thunder below. Then we continue the story. Nadia sat with her hands on the wheel and did not start the engine. Outside, somewhere in the Sierra Nevada, the fire was still burning down to its own edges, doing what fire does when no one is managing it anymore, settling, finding its own perimeter, becoming, at last, containable. She started the car. What came next would arrive in pieces. Kerrigan's badge turned in before dawn, the DOJ's referral landing like a second reckoning, the map itself entering evidence in a civil suit that would not stop until every institution that had ignored it paid the cost. Within 72 hours of the debrief adjourning, the Region 9 Fire Operations Regional Director position appeared as vacant in the federal personnel system. The U.S. Forest Service's Regional Human Resources Office issued a separation notice to Holt Kerrigan. The language in that notice was plain, pending federal investigation, breach of supervisory conduct standards. His building access card was deactivated the same morning the notice was served. The Region 9 Excellence Award mug sat on his desk. Nobody came for it. The duty officer, following standard property protocol, placed it in a cardboard box and set the box in the hallway outside the office. It stayed there for 3 days. On the 4th day, a maintenance worker moved it to a storage shelf near the supply closet at the end of the corridor, the same corridor where the data review room sat, dark and locked, stacked floor to ceiling with 22 years of archived fire reports in manila folders. Nobody put Kerrigan's name on the box. 1 week after the debrief, the Inspector General's office formally opened the investigation. The referral documentation went to the U.S. Department of Justice as predicate material for a federal procurement fraud inquiry. The $4,200,000 certification contract, Reed Calloway's field log, the suppressed hydraulic sensor report. All of it entered the DOJ inquiry file under the contract number the IG representative had read aloud in the conference room, the same number Priya Okafor had transcribed from the NIFC file weeks earlier, sitting at a folding table in the field coordination trailer with the smell of diesel and retardant in the air. The hydraulic sensor manufacturer's legal team received formal notice of the investigation on a Tuesday. By Thursday, they had issued a public statement. The language was careful, corporate, and unmistakable. The company was withdrawing its Region 9 certification contract and was cooperating fully with federal authorities. The statement did not mention Kerrigan by name. It did not need to. The contract number appeared in the first paragraph. 3 weeks after the debrief, Marcus Dell's family filed a civil wrongful death action in the U.S. District Court for the District of Nevada. 2 adult children named as plaintiffs. The defendants were Holt Kerrigan and the hydraulic sensor manufacturer. The complaint cited the $4,200,000 certification contract, the suppressed hydraulic pressure sensor test results, and the false pilot error classification that had carried Marcus Dell's name for 2 years as the official cause of an accident he did not cause. The suit sought damages for fraudulent misrepresentation and concealment. The filing was a matter of public record. Anyone who wanted to read it could. The National Transportation Safety Board opened its own review separately, under its own authority, upon receiving the NIFC file package and the suppressed sensor report. Within 30 days, the NTSB issued a preliminary finding. 1 paragraph. The language withdrew the phrase, contributing factor, pilot spatial disorientation from the crash summary, and replaced it with hydraulic system failure, cause under investigation. Marcus Dell's name was removed from the pilot error classification. No ceremony, no press conference, 1 paragraph in a federal document, and 2 years of erasure came undone in the time it takes to sign a form. His hand-notated windshear data sheets were in the federal record now. His initials, MD, pencil original, blue ink second pass, red annotation third, were cited in the NIFC methodology framework under his full name. The data had been there the whole time, folded into archived incident reports, filed in a windowless room, assigned to a woman Kerrigan had sent there to be quiet. The Region 9 conduct review against Nadia Voss was formally closed, not suspended, closed. The Region 9 acting director issued a written notice. The review had been initiated under a command authority now under federal investigation, and its continuation would not serve the interests of the service. The notice did not read as an apology. It read as an administrative correction, which was exactly what it was, and Nadia did not expect more than that. The same written notice formally adopted Nadia's predictive modeling framework as operational protocol for Region 9 Type 1 incidents, citing the NIFC debrief determination as the basis. The Dell methodology, named as such by name in the framework citation, was listed as the analytical foundation. A dead man's field notes, hand-annotated, suppressed for 2 years, were now the operating standard for the region that had buried them. Reed Calloway was promoted to Regional Operations Coordinator within 6 weeks of the debrief. His contemporaneous field log was credited in the IG referral documentation and retained as a federal exhibit. He bought a new spiral-bound notebook at a stationery supply store on Virginia Street in Reno. He paid cash. He clipped it to his vest the same morning he reported to his new assignment. He did not make a production of it. It was just the next notebook. 1 week after the debrief, Priya Okafor called Nadia. Nadia was standing in the hallway outside the data review room. She had gone back to retrieve the last of her archived annotation stacks, 2 folders she had left on the desk when she walked out the morning of the conduct hearing. The room was the same. Single overhead bulb, the smell of old paper and dry ink, stacks of manila folders reaching the ceiling. She had not turned the light on. She stood in the doorway and looked at it for a moment, then picked up the 2 folders and pulled the door shut behind her. Her phone rang. The Dell methodology is formally cited in the NIFC framework now, Priya said, by name. Nadia leaned against the wall in the hallway. The rolled incident map was under her left arm. Good, she said. A pause. NIFC wants to know if you'll consult on the methodology review, Priya said. Formal advisory role. They'd work around your schedule. Nadia did not answer immediately. The hallway was quiet, fluorescent overhead, the same as always. The faint sound of the radio console room 2 doors down. I'll think about it, she said. Priya's long, listening silence, the one Nadia had learned to read as the pause that meant she had already anticipated the answer and was giving the other person room to arrive at it. Take your time, Priya said. The call ended. Nadia set the phone in her jacket pocket. She held the 2 folders against her side. The rolled map stayed under her arm. She walked out of the building. 2 weeks after the debrief, Nadia was called back to the federal conference room in Reno to sign the formal record of the NIFC methodology adoption. A procedural requirement, 3 signatures on a government form, a clerk to witness, a file stamp to apply. The kind of bureaucratic close that institutions attach to decisions that have already been made in rooms more consequential than this one. She signed. The clerk gathered the papers, checked the file stamp, and carried the folder to a cart near the door. A second clerk retrieved a coat from a hook. They exchanged a few quiet words about the building's parking validation process. The room emptied. Nadia was the last person in it. The mahogany table was bare. The projection screen was off. The hum it made when it ran was gone, and the room without that hum was a different kind of quiet. The quiet of a space that had already done what it was built to do and was finished. Calloway's field log was in the federal record. The $4,200,000 certification contract was in the federal record. Marcus Dell's hand-notated windshear data sheets were in the federal record. None of those things were on this table anymore. The table was just a table. Nadia picked up the rolled incident map from the chair beside her. She tucked it under her left arm, the same way she had carried it into the data review room 6 weeks ago, the same way she had carried it through the conduct hearing, the same way she had set it on the mahogany table the morning of the debrief, unrolled it, and walked the room through a flank collapse timeline that Holt Carrigan had spent 2 years trying to make inadmissible. The map was the same map, 3 colors of annotation, a decade of ridgeline fire behavior. Marcus Dell's hand-drawn windshear directional arrow, older than her own marks, accurate in ways she had confirmed against the fire's actual behavior in real time from a supply closet desk with a radio and no operational authority. She walked toward the door. The work was unchanged. The world had caught up to it. Nadia Voss, incident commander. She mapped the fire they told her to forget. She did not look back at the room. The hallway outside the federal conference room was the same hallway it had been on the morning of the debrief, institutional carpet running to a set of glass doors, fluorescent overhead light that made everyone look slightly tired, a building directory mounted on the wall near the elevator that no one ever read. Nadia had walked this hallway twice now. The first time she had been carrying a rolled map and a decade of evidence into a room that had not yet decided whether to hear her. The second time, she was carrying the same rolled map out of a room that had finished its work. There was a difference between those 2 walks. She did not need to name it. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in. The rolled map stayed under her left arm. She thought about Marcus Dell, not about what had happened to him. She had carried that long enough. She thought about the hand-drawn arrow on the windshear data sheet. The way his annotation ran slightly uphill at the end, as if the pen had lifted before he intended it to. She had looked at that arrow hundreds of times in the data review room, in the supply closet, in the pre-dawn quiet of fire day, too, when the model's projection was running and the southern corridor was still full of crews and the eastern flank had not yet moved. She had looked at it and understood, not for the first time, that Marcus Dell had known exactly what that ridgeline would do. He had known and filed it and been classified as a pilot error. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened onto the building's lobby. Marble floor, a security desk, afternoon light coming through the front glass in long, flat angles. Priya Okafor was standing near the door, her federal agency lanyard around her neck, the cracked plastic badge clip catching the light. She had a folder under one arm and a coffee cup in her other hand. She looked up when Nadia came out of the elevator. She did not say anything about the debrief. She did not say anything about Carrigan or the censor contract or the Inspector General's referral. Those things were in the record. They did not need to be repeated in a lobby. What she said was, Dell's wind shear methodology. Nadia stopped. Priya said it again, more precisely. NIFC's operational methodology adoption. The paperwork names Dell's wind shear framework as the foundational analytical layer. She paused. His name is in it. Nadia had not known that. No one had told her. She had signed the form, the clerk had gathered the papers, and the folder had gone to the cart by the door. She had not read the full citation language. She stood in the marble lobby of the federal building in Reno, Nevada, holding a rolled incident map under her left arm, and something moved through her chest. Not the slow, familiar compression she had learned to carry, but something else, something that had no operational name. She did not let it show. Good, she said. Priya nodded once. She turned toward the door. Nadia followed her out into the afternoon. The light outside was hard and clear, the way Sierra Nevada light was in early season. No smoke, no haze, just elevation and angle and the particular quality of air that had come down off the ridgelines clean. The parking structure across the street stood in shadow. A few other debrief attendees were moving toward their vehicles. No one gathered. No one debriefed the debrief. Nadia stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The rolled map was under her arm. Marcus Dell's name was in a federal methodology document, filed and stamped and irreversible. The $4,200,000 contract was in the Inspector General's hands. Reed Calloway's contemporaneous log was in the permanent record. Crew 7's 22 personnel were home. Crew 12 was home. Crew 19 had burned 2 shelters and gone home. The fire had done what the model said it would do. The model had done what Marcus Dell built it to do. She walked to her vehicle. She set the rolled map on the passenger seat. She did not look back at the building. The work was what it had always been. A decade of ridgeline fire behavior, 3 colors of annotation, 1 hand-drawn arrow made by a man who was gone. She started the car. She drove north toward the Sierra Nevada into the hard afternoon light. The drive north took 2 hours and 40 minutes. She did not turn on the radio. The highway climbed out of the valley floor through high desert scrub, then into the first timber stands, then into the lower reaches of the drainage corridors she had been mapping from a windowless room for 3 weeks. The road signs named elevations. The air changed register as she climbed, cooler, thinner, carrying the particular dryness of exposed granite and open ridgeline. She did not think about the debrief room. She thought about wind, specifically the way wind moved through a drainage couloir at the southern flank transition, the behavior she had documented from Marcus Dell's hand-notated sheets, the way the shear reversal at ridge elevation was not a single event but a progressive compression, a narrowing of the air column that the hydraulic pressure sensors had been certified to catch and had failed to catch, and that Dell had understood from field observation long before any sensor manufacturer had offered a product. He had not needed the sensors. He had needed someone to read the data he left behind. She had been locked in a room with it. Carrigan had done that. She did not know whether he had understood the irony of it. She did not know whether he had given her those archived reports because he was contemptuous enough to believe she would not recognize what she was reading, or because he had never read them himself and did not know what was in them. It did not matter now. The outcome was the same either way. The archived reports were in the federal record. Dell's methodology was in the federal record. The $4,200,000 contract was in the Inspector General's hands. Her transmission logs were time-stamped and unalterable. The road curved west along a ridgeline and she could see the Sierra Nevada to the north, the upper elevations still carrying late snow in the protected couloirs, the exposed flanks already dry, the chaparral browning at the lower transitions. Fire country. It looked the same as it always looked in the early season, patient, dry, capable of anything if the wind shifted. She pulled off at a gravel turnout above the first drainage. She did not get out of the vehicle. She sat for a moment with the engine running and the rolled incident map on the passenger seat beside her. Crew 7's line boss had said something to her on the radio right before the smoke had closed over the corridor on fire day 2. He had not said thank you. There had been no time, and in any case, the radio channel was operational, not a place for that register. What he had said was, "Voss, we're moving." And then the channel had gone to static, and the fuel break traverse had taken 11 minutes, and when the channel opened again, all 22 of them had been through it. She had not spoken to him after. There had been the conduct review and the insubordination filing, and the weeks of institutional silence while the NIFC review process ran its course. There had been no time to call a line boss about anything other than operational matters, but she knew he had been in the federal conference room. He had been seated at the far end of the table behind the regional chiefs. She had seen him when she entered. He had not looked at her with gratitude or relief or any expression she could have named cleanly. He had looked at her the way someone looks at a piece of terrain they have crossed once and will not forget. She understood that. It was enough. She put the vehicle in gear and pulled back onto the highway, heading north again into the Sierra Nevada light. The map was on the seat beside her. The work was not finished. It was never finished. Not with fire behavior this complex and the data always accumulating and the next season already building pressure in the dried grass and the thinning snowpack. Marcus Dell had known that. He had left his annotations in the margins of reports that no one was supposed to read, in handwriting that was precise and unhurried, the handwriting of someone who understood that the work outlasted the worker. She had read them. She had built what he built further. Now his name was in a federal document, stamped and filed and irreversible, and the man who had tried to bury both of them had been referred to the Inspector General in a room full of witnesses who had, at the end, been unable to look at him. The highway climbed. The light was hard and clear and came off the ridgelines without apology. She drove. The highway leveled at the pass. She pulled over, not because anything was wrong, not because she was lost. She pulled over because the view was the kind that demanded acknowledgement, and she had spent enough of her life refusing to acknowledge things that deserved it. The Sierra Nevada spread south and east, the ridgelines cutting clean against the sky. The corridor was visible from here, or rather, the absence of it was. The scar from the fire, the blackened chaparral on the eastern flank, the drainage couloirs where the wind shear reversal had driven 800 meters of fire in 11 minutes. She could read it from the road the way Marcus Dell had taught her to read terrain, not as a disaster, not as a tragedy, but as data, what the fire had done, what it had been trying to tell the people who had refused to listen. She sat with the engine off. The rolled map was on the seat beside her, as it had been on the seat beside her in the data review room and in the Region 9 Annex for 6 weeks, and on the folding table in Priya Okafor's coordination trailer when the flank collapsed. It had not changed. That was the thing about the work. It did not change based on who believed in it. The fire behaved according to the model whether Carrigan approved the methodology or not. He had never understood that. She had watched his face across the mahogany table in the federal conference room the morning the IG representative had read the contract number aloud, and what she had seen was not the face of a man confronting evidence. It was the face of a man confronting the fact that the evidence had outlasted his ability to contain it. Those were different things. The first was about truth. The second was only about timing. Carrigan had always believed, at bottom, that every problem was a timing problem. That if you controlled the sequence long enough, the inconvenient facts would stop being relevant. Marcus Dell's wind shear data had been filed for 11 years. Quick pause. If you've made it this far, comment the word ocean below. Then we continue the story. It was still accurate. She put the window down. The air off the ridgelines was cold and carried smoke, not from this fire which was contained and declared dead, but from something further north, something early in its season. She could read that too. The dried grass, the thinning snowpack, the way the wind moved across the drainage like water finding a channel. The next season was already building. Priya Okafor had called her the previous afternoon from whatever federal office she had returned to after the debrief closed its record. The call had been brief. Priya's voice had carried that same measured quality it always carried. Questions asked, long silences held, the institutional lanyard clicking faintly against her desk. "The Dell review is formally opened," Priya had said. "The IG office confirmed the scope this morning. Hydraulic sensor report, certification contract, crash classification, all of it." Nadia had said, "Good." There had been a pause. You should know, Priya had said, that the wind shear methodology is being fast-tracked for operational adoption. Region 9 and 3 adjacent regions, the recommendation came from the debrief chair. Nadia had not said anything to that. There was nothing to say that was not already in the federal record, in the model itself, in the 11 years of data that a man with precise and unhurried handwriting had left in the margins of reports that no one was supposed to read. Nadia, Priya had said, after the silence had run its length. I heard you, Nadia had said. That was all. She started the engine now. The ridgelines held the late light the way terrain holds heat, gradually, evenly, without drama. The scar on the eastern flank would revegetate in 2 seasons, maybe 3. The chaparral would come back denser than before, and the manzanita would follow. And in 5 years, a crew working that corridor would not be able to see the ground the way Crew 7 had been able to see it on Fire Day 2. New data, new readings. The model would need updating. She already knew where she would start. She pulled out of the lot without looking back at the building. The drive north took 40 minutes. She did not turn the radio on. The smoke from the northern fire was visible as a low smear against the horizon, gray-white against the darkening blue, and she tracked it without thinking, not as a navigator checks landmarks, but the way a person reads a language they have spoken since childhood. Column height, spread angle, the particular lean of it against the prevailing wind. 14 hours. That was how long she had calculated, on Fire Day 1, between the first flagged wind shear reading and the collapse of the eastern flank. 14 hours in which the outcome had been fully determined and fully preventable and fully ignored by the man whose signature now appeared in a federal file beside a contract number that a room full of people had watched an inspector general representative read aloud. She did not feel satisfaction about that. She was not certain what she felt. Something that was not satisfaction and was not grief but existed in roughly the same region of the chest where both of those things live. The rolled map was on the passenger seat. She had carried it into the conference room that morning under her left arm, the way she had carried it into the data review room on the first day. The way she had carried it through the annex hallway at 4 in the morning, past the stacked manila folders, past the single overhead bulb, past every signal the institution had sent her about where she stood and what she was worth. The map had not changed. The work had not changed. The world had needed until now to catch up to it. Reed Calloway had not spoken to her after the debrief closed. She had watched him from across the mahogany table as the IG representative finished reading the referral language aloud, the formal phrases, the numbered provisions, the announcement that Dell's crash classification was reopened for independent review, and Calloway had sat very still, not rigid, still. The spiral-bound log was still open in front of him where the debrief chair had left it after entering it into the record, its pages fanned slightly, his handwriting visible in the narrow margins. He had looked up once, toward the end, not at Carrigan, not at the IG representative, at her. She had held his gaze for a moment. Then she had looked back at the projection screen where the eastern flank data was still frozen on the final slide, the wind vector overlaid on the terrain model, the 800-meter fire run annotated in red, the timestamp in the lower corner that was 4 minutes earlier than the first Mayday call from Crew 19. She had nothing to say to Calloway that was not already in the record. He had known that, she thought. He had made his choice to document every instruction before the fire was 3 hours old, and that choice had lived in his vest pocket through the collapse and the shelter deployments and the radio calls and the drive back to incident base, had lived there long before he set it on the table. Whatever he needed from her acknowledgement, she did not have it to give. That was not cruelty. It was precision. The northern smoke column shifted as she drove, the wind changing register above the ridgeline in the way it did at this elevation when the pressure differential between the valley floor and the upper drainage sharpened toward evening. She noted it, filed it. The observation had no operational consequence today. Today it was just data, moving through her in the way all data moved, steadily, without urgency, accumulating in the model that never fully switched off. Marcus Dell had worked that way too. She knew it from the handwriting, from the angle of his annotations in the margins of reports that had sat in stacked manila folders for 11 years, waiting for someone to read them the way he had meant them to be read. He had been a precise and unhurried man, and the institution had rewarded his precision by burying it, and the institution would now spend the next several years being forced to confront what it had buried. Not because anyone had demanded justice for him, because the data had been correct, and correct data does not stop being correct when the person who gathered it is gone. She turned onto the highway that would take her back to Reno. The rolled map lay on the passenger seat, and the model ran quietly in the back of her mind, and the next season was already building in the dried grass and the shifted wind and the low-gray smear of smoke on the northern horizon. The work was not done because the debrief had ended. It was done because the record was made. Those were different things, and she had learned the difference the hard way, over years, in rooms that smelled of old paper and dry ink and the particular institutional silence of decisions being made by people who did not go near fire. She had learned it first from Marcus Dell's notes, not the formal reports, the margins. The small hand-notated observations he had made in the hours after each incident, the wind shear readings he had cross-referenced against terrain models nobody else was using yet, the questions he had written in a precise, unhurried hand that nobody had bothered to answer. He had not been a man given to performance. He had been a man given to accuracy, and accuracy, she had understood for a long time now, was not the same as protection. The institution had taken his accuracy and filed it. Then it had taken him. The pilot error classification had been clean and efficient and final, and for 11 years it had held, because the censor report was buried, and the contract was signed, and the manila folders were stacked in a windowless room that nobody was supposed to find useful. Harrigan had known what he was doing when he assigned her to that room. He had been certain of it. The irony of that certainty was the kind of dark, systemic thing she could acknowledge without humor and without bitterness, because neither of those registers added anything to the record. He had handed her the archive that contained the evidence that would end him. That was not poetic. That was just what happened when an institution tried to bury its own data and then ran out of people willing to look away from it. She reached Reno before dark. The highway came down out of the Sierra and flattened into the basin, and the city gathered itself at the edge of the valley the way it always did, low and utilitarian and indifferent to the smoke on the northern horizon. She took the long route past the federal building out of no impulse she could have named precisely. The lights in the conference room on the 4th floor were off. The building was closed and quiet and entirely ordinary from the outside, and that was correct. What had happened inside it had not required the building to be extraordinary. It had required a long mahogany table and a functioning projector, and a room full of people who could not, when the record was placed in front of them, choose to continue not seeing. That was all it had ever required. She parked in the lot outside her building and sat for a moment with the engine off. The rolled map was on the passenger seat. She picked it up the way she always picked it up. Right hand, light grip, the laminate cool against her palm, and she got out. The model ran on the drive home the way it always ran. Fuel load in the dried grass along the highway median, the wind direction at elevation, the way the pressure differential would behave when the seasonal pattern shifted in another 6 weeks. The next season was not a hypothetical, it was a calculation in progress, and the calculation did not pause because one chapter of the institutional record had been formally closed. Marcus Dell had known that. She could see it in the margins of the last report he had ever annotated, the wind shear data from the incident 3 weeks before his crash, the numbers precise and unhurried, the handwriting showing no sign that he had known it would be his last season. He had been working forward. He had always been working forward. The model he built had outlasted him by 11 years, and would outlast the investigation by whatever years came after, because it was correct, and correct data did not require its author to still be alive in order to function. She carried the rolled map upstairs, set it on the desk, sat down. The window faced north, and the low gray smear of smoke on the horizon was still visible in the last of the light, distant and quiet and informative, the way all data was informative if you had the methodology to read it. She opened her laptop, pulled up the next season's preliminary fuel load maps, set her annotated wind shear data alongside them. The work was not done because the debrief had ended. The work was ongoing. It had always been ongoing. That was not a burden. That was the nature of the methodology, patient, cumulative, and indifferent to whether the institution was ready for what it was about to show them. She began to annotate. The preliminary fuel load maps were dated 6 weeks out. She worked through them methodically. Northern sector first, then the eastern drainage couloirs where the seasonal drying ran ahead of the calendar by 12 to 14 days depending on elevation. The wind shear data she had annotated over the past 2 weeks, the same framework, the same methodology, the same hand-notated margins that Marcus Dell had used in a different season on a different set of reports 11 years before she had ever read his name in a file, laid cleanly alongside the new fuel projections. The numbers were not reassuring. They were not meant to be reassuring. They were meant to be accurate. She worked until the gray smear on the northern horizon dissolved into full dark, and the window showed her nothing but her own reflection and the lamp on the desk behind her. She did not look up. There was no one to look up for. Priya Okafor had texted 3 hours after the debrief ended. Transmission logs formally entered into the federal post-incident record. Dell methodology flagged for operational review by NIFC Technical Division. Expect contact within 60 days. Then a second message, 11 minutes later. You should know the IG representative used your model's timeline as the chronological spine of the referral document. Your numbers are now Exhibit 1. Nadia had read both messages, had not replied. The work on the desk had required her attention, and the text had said everything that needed saying. She did not feel vindicated. Vindication was the wrong register entirely. Vindication implied that the model had been about her. It had never been about her. It had been about the fuel load and the wind shear and the 22 personnel of Crew 7 standing in the southern suppression corridor while the eastern flank prepared to do what the data had been saying it would do for 14 hours. The crews had survived. That was the number that mattered. Not the $4.2 million that Kerrigan had signed away to protect a censor report. Not the 11 years that Marcus Dell's methodology had spent in a windowless room in Manila folders waiting for someone to read it. Not the specific silence in the federal conference room when the IG representative had read the contract number aloud and Kerrigan had not answered. Everything else was institutional consequence, and institutional consequence moved at its own pace, slower than fire, steadier than wind, and she had learned harder to suppress than either. She annotated a ridge line in the northern sector, added a note about the drainage couloir's fuel moisture lag, pulled up the wind pattern data from the previous 4 seasons and ran the comparison. Reed Calloway had called 2 days after the debrief. She had answered. He had not said he was sorry. She had not expected him to. What he had said, after a pause long enough to carry weight, was, the log was always going to be on a table somewhere. I just needed to make sure it was the right table. She had understood that. She had told him so. They had not spoken since, and she did not expect they would need to for some time. The work on her desk was sufficient company. Marcus Dell's hand-notated wind shear sheets sat to her left, the way they had sat to her left in the data review room, the way they had sat in her bag during the debrief, the way they would sit on whatever desk she worked at for whatever seasons came next. His handwriting was not elegant. It was precise. The numbers moved across the page in the same direction her numbers moved, forward, always forward, into the next season's unknowns, into the next set of conditions that the institution had not yet learned to read. He had been working forward. She was working forward. The window was dark. The lamp was lit. The preliminary fuel load map for the northern sector was open on her screen with 2 new annotations in red. The next season was not a hypothetical. She turned the page. The preliminary fuel load map stayed open until just past midnight. She did not notice the hour until the lamp flickered once, a brief hesitation in the building's old wiring, and the screen's blue light became for a moment the only thing in the room. She saved the file, closed the annotated comparison, set Marcus Dell's wind shear sheets face down on the right side of the desk, the way she always set them when the night's work was finished, the way she had learned to treat the end of a working session as a deliberate act rather than an accident of fatigue. The rolled map was still on the desk. She had not unrolled it since she walked out of the federal conference room in Reno. It did not need to be unrolled. Every annotation on it was already in the digital file, already time-stamped, already entered into the NIFC coordination record by Priya Okafor's office as supporting documentation for the IG referral. The paper version was redundant in the technical sense. She kept it anyway. There is a difference between a document and an object. The document is what you submit. The object is what you carried. Priya Okafor had sent a single message 4 days after the debrief, not a formal communication through NIFC channels. A direct message, brief, the way Priya did everything. Dell's wind shear methodology is being reviewed for formal integration into NIFC's predictive modeling protocol. You'll receive a request for documentation. Don't be surprised if the request comes with a name attached. The name in the request when it arrived the following week was Dell's, not Nadia's. She had expected to feel something complicated about that. She did not. His name on the framework was accurate. She had built on what he built. Accuracy was not a concession. It was the point. She signed the documentation release and sent it back the same afternoon. The IG investigation was not a fast process. She had known it would not be. Institutional consequence moved the way she had described it to herself in the weeks after the fire, slower than fire, steadier than wind, and the specific bureaucratic machinery that had been set in motion in the federal conference room in Reno would grind at its own pace, through its own required channels, producing outcomes that she would likely read about in formal notices rather than hear about from anyone in the room. She did not require speed, she required accuracy. The time-stamped NIFC transmission record was accurate. Callaway's contemporaneous log was accurate. The 6 data sources attached to her projection model were accurate. The $4.2 million sensor certification contract number that the IG representative had read aloud into the federal record was accurate. Marcus Dell's suppressed wind shear data, annotated in his own hand, filed in manila folders in a windowless room Carrigan had assumed she would never read carefully enough, was accurate. Accuracy, in her experience, did not expire. It waited. She pulled the next sector file from the stack on the left side of the desk, Northern Corridor Drainage System. Fuel moisture readings from the previous 2 seasons flagged at 3 separate elevation bands, a gap in the wind observation data that she had noted in the margin 3 days ago and not yet resolved. She picked up her pen. The lamp held steady. Outside, the building was quiet in the particular way of buildings where decisions are made by people who go home at 5 o'clock, leaving the work for whoever stays. She had been staying since before the fire. She would stay after the investigation concluded, after the IG issued its findings, after whatever formal notice arrived with Carrigan's name on it, and the outcome rendered in the passive institutional voice that treated the end of a career as a procedural matter. The Northern Corridor would not wait for any of that. She wrote the gap notation in full, added the elevation reference, cross-checked it against Dell's shear data from 2 analogous drainages in the archived reports, and found what she expected to find, a pattern that was not yet a prediction but would become one with 3 more weeks of fuel moisture sampling. She marked the cell, moved forward. The season was not hypothetical. It was already accumulating, in fuel loads, in wind patterns, in the slow arithmetic of conditions that either someone read correctly or someone else paid for. She intended to read it correctly. The rolled map sat at the corner of the desk, unchanged. The lamp was lit. The work was open. She turned the page. If Nadia's story landed for you, if you've ever watched someone's work get buried and wondered whether it ever surfaces, subscribe and drop a comment below. We tell more stories like this one and we read every response. We'll see you in the next one.